For Nathan Dean joins us, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst. Nathan, of all the stories coming out of the White House and to a lesser degree Congress, what are the ones that are front and center for you and for the folks down at D.C.?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of the geopolitical stuff is driving the news this week, especially with President Trump's tweet about Russia and Ukraine. But for those of us here in Washington, we're certainly paying attention to the Senate budget reconciliation process. This is the two-bill strategy compared to the House one-bill strategy in terms of implementing President Trump's tax cuts. We just saw President Trump tweet about an hour ago that he is now endorsing the House strategy as opposed to the Senate strategy. So what does this mean? Well, Senator John Thune is actually discussing with Vice President Vance and the senators today about whether or not to proceed with this bill because, the challenge of getting this one big beautiful bill is going to be extremely difficult. I don't think anybody in Washington truly anticipates that this is going to happen in the near month. So the Senate, on the other hand, wants to move forward with their own goals in terms of border defense, immigration, and also, boosting up our defense by around $150 billion as an interim. So it's a little wonky for those of us here in Washington from the market perspective. The key thing to note is this defense contractor angle, because if the Senate eventually does get their way, you're looking at $150 billion in defense spending boost. So that's certainly the defense contracting industry is going to be paying attention to.
It's so surprising to me because you've got this Department of Government Efficiency that's allegedly looking to reduce spending in a first move by firing federal workers, right? And that's 4%, I think, of the entire budget. Medicare and Medicaid is like 24% of the budget. The military is 12%. It seems to me that they're looking in the wrong place. Are we expecting down the road cuts to military spending, cuts to healthcare spending?
You hit it right on the head. I mean, DOGE obviously is looking at what they are calling the low-hanging fruit. And you just said 4 to 5% of the budget is the U.S. federal workforce. That's not going to get you to a deficit-reducing, status. It's going to be up to Congress through reconciliation and just bipartisan government spending bills to touch other things. And when President Trump comes out and says we're not going to touch Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security, well, that's not in the House bill. That one big beautiful bill has a lot of Medicare spending cuts. So this is the challenge the Republicans are going to have is you have, on one hand, DOGE and Elon Musk going around trying to find efficiencies in the U.S. government. That's not going to really get you anywhere in terms of the deficit. On the other hand, you have, the mandatory spending, which, President Trump has said that we're not going to touch. And you also have this idea of tax cuts. If the Republicans move forward and they have $4.5 trillion worth of tax cuts and they don't find either economic growth or offset spending, offsets to that, that adds more to the deficit. So DOGE is certainly driving a lot of headlines at the moment, but ultimately it will be Congress that decides what the future of the deficit looks like through this reconciliation process and just trying to find other ways to cut spending that gets enough votes through the, across the line.
By the way, Nathan, does that $4.5 trillion, when you're looking at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, include giving back the SALT deduction?
It does. I mean, obviously that, the SALT deduction is actually a very small portion of that $4.5 trillion, but it's very important for the folks, up in New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. And where the SALT status is at the moment is, Representative Lawler from New York has said that he's not going to support any deal that doesn't raise that $10,000 cap. It's been whether or not this cap ends up at 50,000 or 100,000. President Trump floated 100,000.
There was no cap before Trump put it into place in 2017. Just get rid of the cap.
Well, I don't think that's going to fly because there are a lot of other lawmakers from other parts of the United States that view that cap as an easy way to help offset some of those tax cuts. Now, it's not going to get you much, but it does get you something, and every dollar amounts here. So I don't think doing away with the cap is where it's going to go, but I do think President Trump, based on a meeting that he had with the SALT caucus, if you will, recognizes that cap has to go up. So whether it's 50,000 or 100,000, we don't know. But I do think that cap is going to increase from 10,000 to something when ultimately this is decided.
All right, I'm just totally confused. So let me just go to the easy question. Give me some dates, Nathan. When does stuff kind of have to happen? What dates should we all be paying attention to?
Yeah, so right now this debate over the reconciliation bill is going forth this week and next. The House is out of recess this week. Senate potentially could have a vote. But reconciliation, we're telling our clients, look, there's a lot of headlines, but we don't have to really start paying attention to it from a market perspective, probably until June, July at the earliest, more likely later than that. Now, the next major update coming up is March 14th. That is when the government funding needs to be dealt with, or else we have a government shutdown. We've started getting questions from clients. Are we going to get a shutdown? What you need to know are two things. One, there's really no market impact of a shutdown, not even amongst defense contractors. We struggle every single time a shutdown occurs to try and find out what that impact is. And then secondly, we don't think there's actually too high of a chance of a shutdown right now, just because the Democrats sort of need more of a strategy of what are they trying to get out of this rather than trying to just fight Doge and this idea of Doge. So we do think a shutdown is coming sometime in the next 6 to 9, 12 months. Probably not going to be in March, though. Could potentially be in September later this year.
Tariffs are, it looks like, finally coming up, right? You've got, I think in March is the date for steel and aluminum tariffs, and then April 2nd, President Trump has made the deadline for retaliatory tariffs, possibly 25% or more on cars, chips, and drugs. Does he really have to go through with these things? I mean, if he doesn't, he risks being called the boy who cried wolf, right? So doesn't he have to put, at least for a short time, some of these tariffs on?
Yeah, I had that question exactly from a client this morning. They used the same terminology, boy who cried wolf. And the thing to note with these deadlines is that they're self-imposed. President Trump can always change them, and so they can always push them back based upon what happens in the negotiations. We saw this with Canada, we saw this with Mexico, we saw this with Colombia. So what we're telling our clients is this. Look for President Trump's statements, his Truth Social posts, his statements on what other countries can give back when it comes especially to reciprocal tariffs. Because if President Trump is going into this with the idea that you charge us, we're going to charge you, that means that there's a greater chance that these reciprocal tariffs are coming. But if he says, well, look, I'm going to see if European automakers change their ways, or maybe the United States can get more banks into Canada, things that he's talked about, maybe those reciprocal tariffs come off. So it's hard to predict. I apologize for that. But, we're looking for those little nuggets to see that if President Trump gives an opening to what other countries can give in return, those reciprocal tariffs and those other large tariffs may not actually occur.
All right, Nathan, we're leaving it up to you to figure all this stuff out and report back to us. Nathan Dean, Senior Policy Analyst of Bloomberg Intelligence. He actually does follow and understand how this sausage gets made down there.
I bet he's surprised I didn't ask him about safe banking.
But you got the salt question.
The salt question I got in there, but yes. I didn't ask him about weed.
The weed banking?
I'm still interested to see when there will be legislation passed that makes it legal nationally for marijuana vendors to bank.
What? Is weed only in 38 states now? Is that the number?
Is it 30? I thought it was like 26.
Maybe 26, something like that.